Elaine Carter was the kind of woman whose presence commanded attention before she even spoke. Her name shimmered in glossy magazines and investor reports, celebrated as the youngest female CEO to take a small local brand and transform it into a multimillion-dollar empire. She was known for her elegance, her power, and her ability to turn every challenge into opportunity. On the night of her company's 10th anniversary gala, the ballroom was a glowing masterpiece of crystal lights and champagne laughter. The city's wealthiest gathered to honor her success, eager to be seen beside the woman who represented ambition in its purest form. Elaine stood beneath the chandeliers, draped in a silver gown that reflected every flash of a camera. She smiled for the press, gave confident handshakes, and walked the marble floors as if the world itself had been built in her honor. Yet beneath the poised smile and measured grace, her pulse throbbed with exhaustion. The evening had begun perfectly: music, speeches, a cascade of praise, but something inside Elaine felt strangely hollow. She had worked endlessly to climb every rung of success, yet that night she felt detached, like an observer in her own celebration. Her assistant whispered reminders about the next toast, the next photo, the next public gesture that would keep her image flawless. She nodded, lifting her glass to the crowd and offering polished words about resilience and independence. But as she spoke, her vision blurred for a moment, and the faces in front of her seemed to spin like reflections in water. She blinked, forcing composure, unwilling to let anyone see weakness. When the applause rose, she smiled automatically, though her breath came shallow and her fingers trembled around the crystal stem. Moments later, as the orchestra swelled and guests began to dance, Elaine took a step back toward the edge of the stage, pressing a hand to her temple. The room tilted gently, lights flaring like white fire. She heard someone laugh nearby, unaware that the woman they admired was about to fall. Her knees weakened, her heart stumbled in rhythm, and before she could call for help, darkness folded around her. Gasps erupted across the ballroom, a rush of voices calling her name, and then the world vanished into silence. When she opened her eyes, she expected to find herself in a hospital suite surrounded by doctors, perhaps her worried assistant hovering by her side. But she was greeted by nothing but darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. A cold surface pressed against her back. The air was heavy with the scent of oil, rust, and dust. Slowly, confusion took over her senses. She lifted her head, wincing at the dull ache throbbing through her temples. The ceiling above her was lined with pipes and flickering bulbs. She wasn't in a hospital, and this certainly wasn't her penthouse. Elaine sat up, every breath trembling. Her silk gown was creased and stained, her jewelry gone. The cold concrete floor met her bare feet, and she could hear faint humming nearby, a soft, childlike sound. Turning her head, she saw a little girl sitting cross-legged beside a low wooden table, cradling a broken toy car in her hands. The child looked up, her big brown eyes calm and curious, and for a moment, their gazes locked. It was not the judgmental stare Elaine had grown used to, not the calculated look of business associates or journalists. It was simply innocent recognition. The girl tilted her head and said softly, "You're awake." Elaine tried to speak, but her throat was dry. "Where am I?" she finally managed, her voice cracked, a mix of fear and disbelief. The child smiled and said, "Daddy said you needed to rest. You fell down." That small, unshaken voice carried more calm than Elaine herself could muster. She blinked again, scanning her surroundings. Metal tools hung on walls, an old car parked nearby with its hood open, and the faint glow of daylight filtering through dusty windows. She realized she was in a mechanic's garage. Her mind raced to piece together the missing hours. The last thing she remembered was the ballroom, the applause, the sudden dizziness. How did she end up here? Who had brought her? Her instincts, sharpened by years of business survival, told her to demand answers, to take control, but nothing about this place obeyed her rules. There was no assistant, no staff, no comfort of status. Only the low hum of an old radio and the quiet presence of a little girl who didn't seem afraid of her. Elaine tried to stand but stumbled. The child rushed forward instinctively, catching her by the arm with surprising care. "Daddy said you should drink water first," she murmured, pointing to a small glass on the table. The woman hesitated, but her lips were parched. She took the glass and sipped, feeling the rough taste of tap water, something she hadn't tasted in years. It felt oddly grounding, almost real. Her pulse steadied slightly, but her thoughts churned with confusion. Her eyes drifted again to the small girl, whose hands were now busy tinkering with the broken toy car. "What's your name?" Elaine asked softly. "Mia," the girl replied, not looking up. "My daddy fixes cars. He said you were hurt." The simplicity of the child's explanation left Elaine momentarily speechless. Somewhere in her mind, she expected this to be a dream, some surreal episode caused by exhaustion, but the concrete beneath her feet and the ache in her body proved otherwise. She reached for the nearest surface, bracing herself as she rose. Each movement echoed through the silent space, and the sound of her high heels clicking against the floor felt foreign here, like a reminder of another world she no longer belonged to. The silence around her carried a strange comfort and an undercurrent of unease. How long had she been unconscious? Why hadn't her security team found her? Her mind replayed the faces from the gala, the artificial smiles, the insincere toasts, the loneliness she had masked so carefully. It was ironic, she thought bitterly, that a woman who controlled everything could lose control so completely. And now, she found herself in the one place where power had no meaning, a mechanic's garage that smelled of oil and honesty. The irony stung, but beneath that sting was something unfamiliar, something human. Elaine looked again at the little girl who now hummed softly to herself, unaware that she was in the presence of a woman who owned skyscrapers and global brands. The innocence in the child's eyes disarmed her. For a fleeting second, the distance between privilege and simplicity disappeared. She lowered her gaze, whispering almost to herself, "What happened to me?" Outside, sunlight began to pour through the cracks in the garage door, washing the concrete floor in gold. The faint sound of footsteps approached, and Elaine turned toward the noise, her heart pounding. Whoever had brought her here was about to appear, and the questions she had, about her collapse, her missing jewelry, her sudden disappearance from the hospital, would demand answers. But for that single moment, as the little girl smiled up at her, Elaine felt something she hadn't felt in years. Vulnerability. The powerful woman who once believed she could control every outcome was now lost in a place where power meant nothing. The world she had built on ambition had vanished overnight, leaving her face to face with reality, a reality that began not with wealth or status, but with a faint voice in the dark saying gently, "You're awake." Elaine sat quietly in that garage, the smell of grease and metal clinging to the air, the hum of distant traffic faintly reaching through the cracks in the walls. Hours had passed since she regained consciousness, yet every detail of her surroundings felt surreal. She, the CEO who spent her days surrounded by polished marble and tinted glass, now found herself surrounded by rusted tools and oil-stained floors. The child who had greeted her earlier was still there, humming softly to herself while sketching shapes in the dust with her fingers. There was a serenity about her that unsettled and calmed Elaine at once. She wanted answers, yet a strange reluctance kept her from breaking the silence. It was as though this fragile moment belonged to another world, one where time moved slower and pride had no use. Eventually, the door creaked open, letting in a slice of daylight. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside, wiping his hands with a rag. His face was marked with exhaustion, but his eyes carried a kind steadiness. He stopped when he saw her awake, a flicker of relief crossing his features. Elaine instinctively straightened her posture, her old authority rushing back. He gave a respectful nod and said quietly, "You're safe now. You passed out. Found you near the bridge last night." She blinked, confused. "The bridge?" she repeated, her voice unsteady. "Yes. I was heading home from work and saw a van door open. Thought maybe there'd been an accident. Then I saw you lying there, all dressed up, and I couldn't just leave you." The simple sincerity in his tone made her pause. No dramatics, no ulterior motives, just matter-of-fact decency. For a woman accustomed to hidden agendas and contractual kindness, it was oddly disarming. "Why didn't you take me to a hospital?" she asked, her words sharp but not unkind. He hesitated before replying, "The van had no plates, and you didn't have any ID or phone on you. I figured something was off. And to be honest, the hospital bills here can bury a man alive. I thought you'd prefer a quiet place until you woke up." Elaine looked down at her hands, remembering her missing jewelry, her empty wrist. Someone must have taken her belongings before he found her. The thought sent a chill down her spine. For the first time, she realized she might have been more vulnerable than she wanted to believe. Yet the man before her seemed utterly unconcerned with who she was or what she had. His focus had been on helping a stranger, nothing more. She studied him discreetly. His clothes were simple, worn from labor. His hands bore cuts and calluses that told of long days fixing engines, not shaking hands in boardrooms. His name, she soon learned, was Liam Brooks. He owned this small repair shop and had been struggling to keep it open since his wife passed away 2 years earlier. The little girl, Mia, was his daughter. She had her mother's eyes, he said quietly, and a heart too gentle for the world they lived in. As he spoke, there was no hint of self-pity in his voice, only quiet endurance. Elaine listened, feeling the tension in her shoulders soften. She wasn't used to conversations that didn't revolve around profits or strategy. Here, everything felt stripped of pretense. Liam spoke not to impress but to explain, and Mia listened without interrupting, as if she'd grown up understanding that her father's words carried the weight of their world. Elaine found herself drawn to that authenticity. It was unfamiliar territory for her, a place where simplicity wasn't a flaw but a kind of strength. She tried to imagine what her board of directors would say if they saw her now, sitting on a wooden stool in a mechanic's shop, sipping water from a chipped glass, talking to a man whose hands bore more truth than all the manicured fingers that had ever applauded her. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. Beneath the surface of her disbelief was an ache she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear. It was loneliness. Liam didn't ask who she was or why she'd been dressed like she came from a royal event. He only asked if she was feeling better and whether she needed anything to eat. That kind of humility unsettled her, because it offered no transaction. No one in her world ever did something without expecting a return. She nodded, murmuring thanks she wasn't sure how to mean. Mia disappeared into a small side room and came back holding a piece of toast on a metal plate. It was cold and unevenly buttered, but Elaine took it anyway. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. The child sat beside her, legs swinging idly, watching her with open curiosity. "Your dress is pretty," Mia said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Elaine looked down at the silver gown, now wrinkled and smudged with dirt. "It was," she replied, half smiling. "I think it's ruined now." The girl shook her head. "Daddy can fix anything." Her innocent confidence made Elaine's chest tighten. There was something heartbreakingly pure about a child who still believed everything broken could be repaired. As the hours passed, the haze in her mind began to lift. Fragments of memory returned, the gala, the dizziness, the applause fading into silence. She realized that the last moment she remembered clearly was looking out at a crowd that adored her success but didn't truly see her. The irony struck her now, sitting in a place where she was finally seen by people who didn't even know her name. When the clock on the wall struck noon, Liam began preparing to reopen his shop. Customers would start arriving soon, and Elaine watched as he moved with quiet purpose, tightening bolts, checking engines, making lists. His hands were steady, his focus undisturbed. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked. For a brief moment, she envied him, the man who lived each day for the sake of someone else, whose worth wasn't measured in headlines but in effort. She had built an empire on ambition, yet standing here, she felt as though this small garage held a kind of wealth her world could never offer. She thought of the countless nights she'd spent alone in her penthouse, her reflection in the glass tower window reminding her of everything she'd sacrificed for success. Family, love, softness, those had been casualties of her climb. Now, watching Liam hand a wrench to his daughter and smile faintly when she tried to help, she felt something shift deep within her. It wasn't envy anymore. It was realization. He had lost more than she ever had, yet he still managed to give more than she ever could. Elaine wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask how he managed to live with so little and still remain so steady. But before she could, he looked up at her and said, "Sometimes, life breaks us down so we can rebuild right." The words were simple, spoken casually as he worked, but they landed with quiet force. She didn't respond. She just sat there, feeling the weight of that truth settle inside her, for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to defend herself, to hide behind a title or an image. She was just Elaine, a woman who had been saved by a stranger and his little girl, who now found herself questioning everything she thought mattered. As the sunlight dimmed and the garage fell into shadow again, she realized she no longer felt like an outsider. She was part of their silence, their small kindness, their steady rhythm. For that fleeting moment, the empire outside her mind didn't exist, and all that remained was the soft hum of life happening in its purest, most human form.